All right, well, welcome. My name is Evan Williams. I'm the Cybersecurity Business Group Director here at ANZ in Australia, New Zealand. And today I'm with Michael.
Hi Evan, my name is Michael. I'm a cybersecurity consultant at Arinco.
So today we're going to talk about the returns on mitigation within identity and access management. The first of which is the fact that we're now seeing 37% of customers have no advanced multi-factor authentication protection mechanisms enabled. And the key word there being advanced, Michael. Their insight here is that cyber criminals are leveraging the cybercrime as a service ecosystem to launch phishing, identity, distributed denial of service attacks at scale. Simultaneously, they're increasingly bypassing multi-factor authentication and other security measures to conduct targeted attacks. So Michael, surprising to see this stat. Way too many people not implementing the advanced multi-factor authentication. What have you understood as the key challenges in getting it in place?
Thanks Evan. I think the key challenges here that I see with customers is that there's a disconnect in understanding about what MFA gives you versus what advanced MFA gives you. A lot of customers we see have rolled out MFA, great, and they think they're 100% protected against identity attacks. Attackers are getting far more sophisticated in bypassing standard methods of MFA, such as SMS, one-time password, even push notifications. They are able to man in the middle attack these authentications, so you actually get redirected to a completely legitimate looking site where the attacker in the middle will steal your token on the way through.
Yep.
You've passed MFA, they then replay that token into your org and off they go. So lack of awareness in these kind of attacks. There's also a bit of user pushback at the end user about moving to what we call an advanced form of MFA, which I'll go into in a minute to exactly what that is. We also see a lot of challenges around organisations having multiple different SaaS platforms and multiple identity providers, which may all have different capabilities available when it comes to MFA. When we talk about advanced MFA, what we're really talking here about is passwordless methods of MFA, such as FIDO2 keys, Windows Hello for Business, or the soon-to-be released passkeys, device-bound passkeys. These methods do not allow token replay attacks to occur. If you get phished and you're using a FIDO method, the attacker cannot replay your credentials into the org. Some of the key actions we can do to address this is, it's hard, but try and consolidate your identity providers. If you can move to a single identity provider that has uniform support for authentication methods, integrate that with all your third-party SaaS platforms, we manage to uplift our identity controls here. While we are seeing lack of advanced MFA, don't forget that some MFA is better than no MFA.
Absolutely.
Any MFA is good MFA. At least get MFA in place, and then you can worry about your advanced MFA. When you're looking at who should get advanced MFA, look for your privileged accounts, look for your admins, look for payroll, look for people who attackers will go after in order to exploit your business. Small rollouts of advanced MFA can really help you there. The other thing we can look at doing is, if you can't roll out advanced MFA methods like FIDO, bringing in device compliance policies within conditional access can also make these token replay attacks harder to pull off.
Yeah.
We can also then look at some risk-based authentication within conditional access that will essentially look for things like anomalous tokens, token replays, and block sign-ins. Some of the key technologies we've spoken about here: Entra ID, conditional access policy, FIDO2 keys, Windows Hello for Business, or even certificate-based authentication.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. I think that we're increasingly seeing the sophistication of our attackers. They're really able to look across the organisation and find out where there is vulnerability, and that typically is where there's no MFA. So if you can get that core in place and then get the advanced on top, you're in a lot better position. But we go to the second mitigation. This is another challenging insight. 21% of customers have poor user lifecycle management. It's a critical piece of management to ensure that user access is granted, monitored, and revoked appropriately within that zero trust principle. So, Michael, no matter what size of organization, managing the movement of people within an organization is an ongoing process which can be complex.
Absolutely.
What do you suggest the key actions and solutions are for customers?
So, as you mentioned, it's a challenge. Many orgs have multiple systems, multiple sources of truth of where an employee is, if they're in the org, if they've left the org, if they're supposed to have access to certain systems, if they're not. It's complex. We get inconsistencies here. People are busy. Communication about employees leaving the org isn't relayed to the correct people. Things aren't actioned. It's a very manual process in a lot of orgs. The key takeaway here is automate this as much as you can.
Absolutely.
You should be able to basically automate onboarding, access, offboarding, using a single source of truth like an HR system that just does this for you. HR is always the unit that knows who is employed and who is not. So you can automate this. Aside from automating the provisioning and deprovisioning, then we look at, do people have access to things that they should or shouldn't? We can use access reviews for this. So you can set up an access review for privileged groups, for privileged roles within the org, and have them reviewed on a monthly basis or weekly basis, whatever works for your org. And essentially, a approver gets an email saying, Evan still has access to this. Does Evan require access to this? Approved, access continued, revoked, access is gone, no response. And we automate the outcome of a no response. Do you default to revoke access? Do you default to grant access? Alongside that, we also have intra-ID identity governance. This allows you to do further access controls around, further lifecycle and access reviews around onboarding and offboarding, as well as you now have lifecycle workflows which help you automate this onboarding, offboarding process. Set of policies, templates that you can implement for exactly those things. Even with employees leaving in 1 week, what do we do to prepare the account for offboarding? Where you can't use these, we can look at doing access packages, time-based access packages for access, where an employee is dropped into an access package, granting them access to systems, automatically revoked at the end or on a time-based. And then outside of that even further, when you run into these edge cases, which some of the out-of-the-box tools can't do, we can build custom logic apps or automation accounts to do this for you and bring in that integration with your HR system. Some of the key technologies that we've talked about here, intra-ID governance. There's some really great stuff in there in assisting you with this very common problem. Access reviews, critical. Don't put somebody into a privileged group and leave them there forever, especially if they're not using it. And lifecycle workflows.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such an important topic. User lifecycle management, you just think it is a core management principle everyone should have in place, and there are some great tools to automate. So thank you for Michael. Let's move to the third mitigation here. Another amazing stat, 47% of customers are still using legacy cloud authentication. Obviously that draws an enormous number of challenges around security with that stat. So it's surprising. What are some of the more modern approaches customers can take to address this, Michael?
Sure. Well, first I'll go into what exactly is legacy cloud authentication. I think there's a lack of awareness of some of these old protocols like SMTP, like IMAP, that they are not strong protocols when it comes to protecting your identity within the cloud. And first of all, people don't understand that it is not good to have these enabled and why. They're very susceptible to brute force attacks, password sprays, these kind of things. Then we have organizations where they run legacy systems that require these protocols to be in place or they break. Then we have the challenge of people saying, how do we fix this? And I see a lot of orgs almost get paralyzed and worried about this is going to break everything if we disable these protocols. My printer won't be able to send emails. My manager won't be able to get emails in the native app on his phone. We can't turn this off because things will break. One of the things we can do here is actually leverage up your coverage of disabling these protocols very, very quickly to 90% without breaking things.
Right.
Via conditional access, we can implement policies that will block these protocols. You implement them in audit mode for a couple of weeks. You'll get nice reports out of there that show you which devices are using these legacy auth protocols. You then drop them into an exception group, block it for everyone else. You'll get to 90% blocked. 90% blocked is obviously much better than 0%. And then you can work through mitigating that last 10%, finding out why those, why they are in place, what you need to do. So very, very quickly, turn it off for 90, work through that last 10%. Another thing we can do here where we have legacy web apps that may use legacy auth protocols is investigate putting Entra ID application proxy in front of it. This will sit a modern auth interface in front of your web apps, pass through authentication. Obviously, we need to look at upgrading apps to support modern authentication protocols. This can be really hard. There's a lot of legacy code out there that is hard to do. Developers moved on. People don't know how these custom apps work anymore within an organization. So where that occurs, we just need to look at what can we do to ring fence or isolate these systems that you can't decommission or upgrade. Make sure that they can't be used as a leverage point to be jumping off into other areas of your systems if they're compromised. So key technologies here: conditional access, Entra ID application proxy. Specifically within conditional access, look at audit mode, look at the reports that come out of there, get yourself up to that 90% quickly, worry about the 10% over time.
Yeah, just another great example of how you need to consistently stay on top of your security posture. Thank you, Mike. Let's move on to the fourth, return mitigation. So here we're seeing 37% of customers are not having advanced password protection enabled. Again, alarming percent here. If you look at some of the stats that we're seeing, we've had to block over an average of 4,000 password attacks per second over the last year. These attacks are so prevalent because the security posture of organizations is quite low, and we're really seeing a lot of this in the education sector, but it's prevalent across so many segments. Many of these organizations, again, have not enabled multi-factor authentication. They're leaving them vulnerable to phishing, credential stuffing, brute force attacks. So, Michael, again, this password management, passwords generally, is an ongoing challenge. What advice do you have for customers who are challenged with password protection?
Sure, Evan. So I think one of the really key issues here is that there are a couple of tools out there that many customers are just not aware of. They're in the Microsoft ecosystem and they don't know that there's some protections available that are highly effective at stopping the use of weak passwords, passwords that have been leaked onto the internet, involved in breaches, and users choosing poor passwords that may look complex but are actually very, very simple for attackers to guess or crack. We have this additional challenge of implementing stronger password controls is actually not technically difficult to do. The hardest part is educating your users on what makes a good password. So it's actually something like implementing advanced password protection I can do in a couple of days, and it will take weeks for the comms to go out to users and for users to understand what makes a good password and what doesn't. So user education here is key. Key action, what we actually have here is a capability called Entra ID password protection. So what this tool does is it evaluates passwords on a score system, telling you and letting you set only what counts as a secure password, essentially looking for things like password length and complexity rather than short complexity around uppercase, lowercase number. A password like summer 2023 ! Is super easy to crack, will be cracked in less than a second, and a password such as a passphrase, which may be even three dictionary words together that is longer, is very, very hard to crack. Entra ID password protection will prevent users from choosing these kind of weak passwords. The second part that people don't know is that this can actually be extended into your on-prem environment. So from Azure, you can deploy agents across to your domain controllers, which will enforce the same level of control of passwords for your on-prem AD accounts. Extremely useful, not difficult to set up, and highly, highly effective.
Yeah.
Second key action is lapse. Again, local admin password solution, unique local admin passwords on all devices. They're not reusable across devices. So some of the key technologies we just mentioned is Entra ID password protection. Extend that to your on-prem Active Directory, get the same protections for your local accounts. Use lapse. Local admin password solution is great.
Yeah. And the key saying here is that attackers don't, have complex ways of breaking in. They just sign in, and
Exactly.
so these things are just absolutely key for organisations, especially as they still have a lot of on-prem while they're moving to the cloud.
Essentially, identity is the new firewall.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the fifth mitigation here. Here we're seeing that 24% of customers are missing context-based multi-factor protection mechanisms. This is, again, getting deep into the need for multi-factor authentication, Michael. I'll hand over to you to explain what are the customer challenges and how do we go about enabling them to implement a context-based authentication.
Sure. So I guess here we have customer challenges again of firstly adopting strong MFA can be costly, well not necessarily costly, but it's an additional expense. Additional expense that many orgs don't necessarily want to do. They say we've got MFA, why do we need something stronger? Then configuring these kind of context-based protection mechanisms. And what we're talking about here in terms of context-based MFA is if you need to access a highly privileged role within the org, such as global administrator, enforcing the use of passwordless auth or a FIDO key to actually use that role. Similarly, accessing confidential data, you can put context-based MFA that says if you need to access this, you cannot use SMS MFA because it's too weak.
Yeah, love that.
Some of the key actions here in how do we go about even doing this? Firstly, you need to define what are you trying to protect here. What are the kind of things that would really, really hurt your org if they were compromised? And what we think about here is highly privileged admin roles. Highly privileged admin roles, to use them, should be using stronger MFA. You should disable the use of your weaker forms of MFA. Confidential data, something critical to your business, same deal. Obviously, we need to deploy the strong MFA for users. Grab a couple of FIDO keys. They are great, they are cheap, they work, and they are highly effective at this kind of thing. Then you create these context-based policies within conditional access to enforce the level of controls. If user is accessing this, can only be done with advanced MFA.
Yeah. It's really good. I love this because if you think about, customers are looking to assess the risk within their organization, like a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. The risks sit with these administrators. They sit with their confidential data. And so you should naturally then think about how you put extra security across this, and the context-based approach is really strong. Let's move to the sixth mitigation. 54% of customers are missing the security barrier between the cloud and on-prem. We've spoken about this. I believe in Australia and New Zealand, there's still, as people move to cloud, 60% of them still have on-premise within their structure. So this, again, is a critical topic. If 54% have no security barrier between the cloud and on-prem, this means we've got a large number of customers that are vulnerable to attacks. What are some of the actions that customers can take here?
Sure. I guess, again, it comes back a lot to education. Customers love having a single source of truth for all their accounts. And that is what we often see is that is on-prem AD, all accounts synced to the cloud, single identity across both. Your on-prem domain admins are also your cloud admins. Now, unfortunately, what that means, if your on-prem identity gets compromised, your entire cloud identity also gets compromised. So what we need to do is look at not synchronizing those privileged on-prem accounts into your cloud. They should be absolutely cloud native accounts for your global admins, privileged identity admins, authentication admins, and local accounts that aren't synchronized for your on-prem management. There's also, I guess, a lack of awareness of what to sync. in terms of which accounts we synchronize to the cloud. Now, a lot of people will go with the defaults, sync everything. Not always a good idea. You can end up synchronizing privileged service accounts up to the cloud, accounts that just can be used to further leverage access into your cloud environment. Scope what you need to access. Look at the risk of, if this account got compromised on-prem, what could it do in the cloud, and what could it be used for? Some of the key actions here, obviously, don't sync your privileged accounts. You really need to be careful about this. Your global admin and high privilege role accounts should not be hybrid accounts. If they are synchronized, what we can look at doing is using privileged identity management. So by default, these accounts do not have global admin enabled in the cloud. They must go into PIM, enable access to the account to that privilege for a scope period of time. MFA is enforced on that, and that again, along with your context-based authentication, can enforce high levels of MFA or even an approval workflow for users to actually get into those privileged roles. Very, very important with those privileged roles is MFA enforced, high levels of MFA. And we see a lot of organizations using trusted locations to bypass MFA. They do this because they don't want their users getting prompted for MFA every 5 seconds. If they're coming from an office location, they say, this is trusted, you can single factor auth, no MFA, or reduced period of how often they need to MFA. On-prem account gets accessed, it's a high privilege user, they're straight in with no MFA. Don't need an authenticated device at all. Privilege roles never bypass MFA for any reason. Obviously, we need to know exactly what you're syncing to the cloud, scope appropriately based on risk, and then access reviews again. Always access review your privilege roles to ensure, first of all, no accidental additions to those roles. People don't have roles they're not using. Access reviews will give you a report on that. Evan's had global admin for 3 months and has used it once. Does he really need this? Key technologies we've spoken about here. Scoping what you're synchronizing through Azure AD Connect, privileged identity management, and conditional access policies. But a lot of, really, this is a process thing and a risk-based approach. Look at what you're syncing and why, and reduce the footprint of privileged account crossover between cloud and on-prem.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. To me, if you look at a cybersecurity practice, it's not just about the tools, which can help you automate and do things more efficiently. It is absolutely about your processes and your people. Like, are you setting up the right processes and the skills and people to ensure you're staying on top of the risk profile that you want? And the way you spoke about the privileged roles there, that was just so important for everyone to really make sure they're on top of.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.